Al Jazeera Podcasts.
First, a heads up, this episode contains descriptions of sexual violence. Today, outrage over a doctor's brutal rape and murder in India.
Doctors and nurses protested in Kolkata over the rape and murder of a medic last week. The case has shocked India.
Why history continues to repeat itself in India's fight against rape culture. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. On August 8th, a 31-year-old junior doctor had just finished a 36-hour shift at a hospital in Kolkata, India. There was no dedicated place for doctors working overnight, so she went to sleep on the floor of a seminar room in the building. Her body was found the next morning. She'd been raped and murdered. An autopsy revealed injuries all over her body, and the cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation and smothering, with clear evidence of sexual assault. The doctor's name has not been officially released, but we do know the name of a suspect, Sanjay Roy. He was arrested in connection with the case.
He is a volunteer at the hospital where this incident occurred. And what is shocking is that he had access to all these areas when he had absolutely no business doing that. Of course, what preliminary reports have suggested, and even the parents of the victim have said, is that it's not just one person. This seems like this was a gang rape and, of course, murder. I am Pavni Mittal. I am an international correspondent, and I have been reporting on India for more than a decade.
So, Pavni, first of all, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here to talk to us about this subject. For the last couple of weeks, we've seen protests erupting across India, doctors striking and refusing to work. What about the details of this particular case have struck such a chord with them and with the public?
Firstly, Natasha, you mentioned some of the details, and they're absolutely horrifying. So I think part of it is just the brutality of it, which is just so hard for anybody who's listening or reading these details to digest, and they automatically, obviously, enrage people. The other thing to remember is that this incident took place in the city of Kolkata in eastern India. Kolkata was just a year ago voted to be one of India's, if not the, but one of the safest cities. That part of India is culturally considered to be more progressive, where women have more agency, where you have a female chief minister. So I think when you look at the cultural context of this, that is another thing that shocks people. If you look at the backstory of this, this is a woman, a young woman, my generation actually, who beat all the odds to be where she is. She comes from a family that worked day and night to give her the education that she would need to become a doctor. Remember, in India, millions of people apply to become doctors at these medical centers, but the acceptance rate in these colleges is in single digits. So it's one of the hardest things to do. She's not someone who had access to the money and education to make that sort of decision. And there's also the patriarchal culture where education in women is not considered to be much of an investment when you compare it to boys. She was, of course, the only child for her parents. And I was looking at some of the interviews when they said that we gave everything we had to her.
Her mother kept calling her continuously, but she was dead by then. The most painful thing is that from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m., no one cared to ask the whereabouts of an on-duty doctor. This is hurtful.
And then this is also a medical worker. This is someone who is in public service. This hospital is government run. The other thing to remember, these are obviously highly respectable jobs, but the fact that this happened to someone of that background is also that made a lot of people, it sort of shattered a dream at one level, but also made many people, especially in urban India, be like, this could have been me. When you talk to women who are protesting across India, they say, this could have been me.
We give 36 hours duty. So if this thing happened inside the hospital, that is like a second home to us. Where are we safe now?
Then, of course, there is that pent-up frustration with the system, that even after so many conversations, after so many cases and protests, that women are just not safe. One of the big protests was Reclaim the Night. That is what the protest was called. It was in Kolkata, the city, but also across India. It happened on the eve of India's Independence Day, and the conversation there is, the country is free and has been free for more than 75 years, but half the population, which is more than 700 million people, are not free. We're not free at home, we're not free at our workplaces, and I think there are so many commonalities there that strikes a chord with women across regions, religions, and social strata.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking. And I'm sure this is also part of what people are responding to, that something this horrific would happen to a woman in her workplace, that there wasn't the security in place to protect her. I also understand that a significant part of the public outrage has been about allegations of mishandling and initially attempting to cover up the case by the local police and the state government, right?
Yeah, Natasha, there are some details that we know that point to serious mishandling. The parents of the victim have come out and said that initially, when they got the call, they were told that the daughter had committed suicide, which obviously turned out to be completely false. Then they say that her body was cremated as if they were in a bit of a hurry. They said, we got access to the body a little later. It was very clear that she had been assaulted. It was very clear that she had not committed suicide. So there is no sense of urgency to look into this case as a serious violation of not just rights, but also workplace policies. And then there is the blame game between governments. You have a state government and you have the union government or the federal government in Delhi that are blaming each other. Now the case has gone to a federal agency that is investigating it, and the central government is saying the local government is covering it up, that they're involved. There was also a case where, when the protests were happening last week, a mob broke into the hospital and vandalized it. And now there is blame game over who is behind that. Is the central government using this as an opportunity to topple the state government? Or is the state government doing it to cover up that it was not able to not just keep women safe in a facility run by its government, but also not able to give protection to a hospital after protests have erupted? So at multiple levels, you have some serious allegations that this has now become a case that has been politicized for political gain.
So now you have doctors that are still protesting, and they're demanding more protections and better working conditions, understandably. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court of India, in a rare move, has taken on the case without a formal petition.
So the Supreme Court doesn't do this often, like you said, but when situations like these go out of hand and when there is politicization and when there are legal demands, they are known to do this very rarely. Like, one of the main reasons why the court took notice, and the court has realized, saying that this is a legal matter, it is well within their jurisdiction to do that, and that this is something that needs immediate attention, because it's also affecting patients. If health services are on strike, then where do people go?
This isn't the first time a rape and murder have ignited nationwide protests in India. But how have things changed? That's after the break. So, Pavni, of course, sexual violence against women is not unique to India. There have been a lot of places that have had, these kind of Me Too moments. But this isn't the first time that the country has seen a case like this. There was, of course, the gang rape case that happened in 2012 in Delhi.
Nirbhaya and a male friend were on a bus journey in Delhi. The 23-year-old physiotherapy student was gang raped by 6 men and her friend beaten before they were thrown out onto the side of a road. Their ordeal led to some of the biggest protests ever seen in India, with widespread demands for justice, not only for Nirbhaya, but better protection for all women.
Now, I know you're someone who's followed all of this closely for a long time. What would you say makes this moment different?
I remember that case very well back in 2012. And I want to first talk about similarities because, again, both cases were just the eerie similarity is healthcare workers, women from similar backgrounds. And I remember that case very well also because it was a conversation starter when it came to women's place in society, more than just assault and harassment. And I could feel that as someone of a certain generation. This was soon after college, especially among urban younger women who were talking about, they're starting their careers and this is what they're feeling and this is how they feel they've led their lives. It was also a time when social media was taking off. So you had those opportunities to amplify your message. I think what feels different is that now after that case, it's important to remember that there were some changes that happened legally. So there were laws that were expanded. The definition of harassment and assault was expanded. It became easier, at least legally, at least on paper, to go and complain if you have faced assault. And so the system sort of made for some changes for that. What is different in this case is even though there is more awareness, especially among women, especially among urban literate women about rights, very little has changed on ground. Since then, you have had the Me Too movement. You've had multiple cases in India where there have been conversations about harassment and safety of women. The fact is that people feel that life is actually not changed that much in terms of safety. Can you go out at night without having to look over the shoulder? That has not changed. And what they're saying is safety has to be absolute. And as I speak, there is another case that is being deliberated in court, and that is of marital rape. And that has also become a big issue that we don't talk about because it hasn't sparked protests. But the fact is that even today, if a man rapes his wife, there is no legal recourse because the Indian justice system does not see that as a crime.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at even the statistics of rape that is considered illegal, they're actually absolutely shocking.
Do you have a sense of how many rape cases there are a day in India?
Yeah, dozens of cases. To give you some perspective, by the time our listeners finish this podcast, at least one woman in India, statistically speaking, would have gone to the police to complain, saying that she was assaulted. The conviction rate is less than 30%, which is very low. Less than 3 out of 10 perpetrators are actually brought to justice. And remember, not every person is going to the police station to complain because there is a larger culture of silencing victims, of ostracizing their families, of repeatedly harassing families, of victim shaming. So that also prevents people from going and complaining. So the statistic that I just shared, about 89 a day, is actually severely undercounted.
It's hard to hear. It's staggering. And I mean, these kinds of high-profile cases with all of their horrific details have changed the narrative. But as you say, there's a lot more that needs to be done. This case has gotten a lot of attention, in part because it is so horrific. But there are other cases that aren't always treated the same way. For example, there are those of Dalit women who face oppression based on their caste. Now, we don't know the caste of this female doctor, but we do know that during this wave of protests, there was a story of women from a slum that was made up mostly of marginalized caste communities being shut out of the protest in an upscale area of Mumbai. And they were being told that their issues were different. Does that surprise you? I mean, do you think that attitude is also part of the problem?
In this particular case, I know the case you're talking about, it is also part of, a larger sort of social structure and the gap that even within, say, a 3-mile radius, you will have people from upper castes, highly educated, who will treat people who live in slums or come from more marginalized societies as not untouchable per se, but you will not be allowed to be part of their protests, for example, So much of these cases, when they happen to women in these marginalized groups, they never spark such outrage because people don't necessarily also even talk about these cases. I mean, I can just tell you anecdotally, you speak to women who work as domestic workers and you work in fields, and when you're reporting across India, and they will often tell you about how there's no HR. If you are raped in a setting where you're working in someone's homes, where do you go? And these are women who need these jobs. And I think that has also been one of the failures of the criminal justice system, where when we talk about laws and workplace laws, the fact of the matter is that more than half of India's population doesn't work in quote unquote formal sectors. They're working in fields, they're working in people's homes, they are working on streets, they are vendors, they're homeless, they're living in slums. So there is very little protection, and there's also a social acceptance of these cases where certain sections of society, especially the privileged ones, feel like, this doesn't really affect us. This is not really that important. Your circumstances are different.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tamara Khandaker and Veronique Eshaya, with Shraddha, Joshi, Duha Mosaad, Hagir Saleh, Manahil Naveed, and me, Natasha Del Toro, in from Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. This episode was mixed by Joe Plourde. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.